Hello and welcome to Annie's Short Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Sinister Toyshop. The small town of Ryde, nestled on the Isle of Wight, held many secrets. Among its cobbled streets and Victorian-era storefronts stood PennyWhistle's Toyshop, a quaint little shop filled with hand-carved dolls, tin soldiers, and other timeless treasures. It was the kind of place that evoked nostalgia and wonder in those who stepped inside. But for Holly Arnold, it would soon become the site of a waking nightmare. Holly had recently inherited her grandmother's cozy cottage near Ryde seafront and moved to the Isle of Wight to escape the relentless pace of London. A writer by trade, she thrived on finding inspiration in the odd and unusual. One crisp autumn morning, as the sea breeze carried the faint scent of salt through the streets, she stumbled upon PennyWhistle's Toyshop. Its faded red sign creaked above the door, and a wooden marionette dangled eerily in the shop window, its painted grin slightly off-kilter. Charming, Holly muttered. The interior was just as she'd imagined, rows of shelves crammed with whimsical toys. The air smelled faintly of varnish and old wood. At the counter stood the proprietor, a gaunt man in his late 50s with wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. His name tag read Mr. Whittaker. Welcome. Looking for something special, just browsing, Holly replied. A porcelain doll caught her attention. Its pale face was framed by auburn curls, and its glassy eyes seemed unnervingly lifelike. She reached out, but Mr. Whittaker's voice froze her hand midair. Careful with that one. Shades. Holly frowned but retracted her hand. Quite the collection you have here. Do you make these yourself? Some. The others. An uneasy silence settled over them. Holly couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched not just by Mr. Whittaker, but by the toys themselves. A stranger in the night. That evening, as she sat by the fireplace in her cottage, Holly's thoughts kept drifting back to the toy shop. There had been something undeniably off about it. Deciding to satisfy her curiosity, she opened her laptop and began researching PennyWhistle's Toyshop. What she discovered sent a chill down her spine. The shop had a dark history. The original owner, Leonard PennyWhistle, had been a doll maker with a macabre reputation. Rumors swirled that his creations were cursed, brought to life by some arcane ritual. After his mysterious death in the 1920s, the shop had passed through several owners, each meeting a grim fate. Holly's investigative instincts kicked in. The next day, she returned to the shop determined to learn more. I couldn't help but notice the history of this place. Strange. His face darkened. Some stories are better left untold. But Holly wasn't easily deterred. That night, under the cover of darkness, she returned to the shop. Breaking in was easier than she expected. The back door's lock was rusted and weak. Inside, the shop felt even more oppressive in the dark. The toys seemed to loom, their features twisted in the flickering light of her flashlight. In the back room, she found what she was looking for, a workshop filled with half-finished dolls and marionettes. On the workbench lay an old journal bound in cracked leather. Flipping through its pages, Holly discovered Leonard PennyWhistle's notes detailed instructions for infusing life into his creations. The final entry read, "They demand justice, they will have it." Suddenly, the temperature dropped. The shadows in the room deepened, and a faint rustling sound filled the air. Holly turned, her flashlight sweeping over the shelves. The toys were moving. The living dead. The first to lunge was the porcelain doll she had admired earlier. Its dainty hands clawed at her, its once adorable face contorted in rage. Holly screamed and swatted it away, sending it crashing to the floor. But more toys were coming to life, tin soldiers marching in formation, marionettes jerking toward her with strings that moved of their own accord. Holly bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before she could reach it. From the shadows emerged Mr. Whittaker, his face pale and drawn. "They've chosen you," he said. "Did they always choose someone?" Holly shouted, her back pressed against the wall as the toys closed in. "Yet they're avenging spirits," he explained. "PennyWhistle wronged them in life, and now they punish the living to balance the scales. You shouldn't have come back." Holly pleaded. "I can't," he whispered. The toy surged forward. Holly grabbed a nearby candlestick and swung it wildly, smashing several of the smaller creatures. But for every one she destroyed, more seemed to appear. Desperate, she remembered the journal. She fumbled for it on the workbench and flipped to the last page. The incantation scrawled there was barely legible, but she began to chant it aloud, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. As the final word left her lips, a deafening shriek filled the room. The Toys froze mid-attack, their bodies convulsing violently before collapsing into lifeless heaps. The oppressive energy in the air lifted, leaving Holly gasping for breath. Aftermath. When morning came, the shop was silent. Holly emerged, clutching the journal. She left it anonymously at the local historical society, along with a warning about the dangers of Pennywhistle's toy shop. But the shop didn't stay closed for long. A new owner took over, drawn by its quaint charm and the potential for profit. And deep within the shadows of the back room, the toys began to stir once more. Unease lingers. Holly couldn't shake the events of that night. Despite her warnings, the toy shop reopened within weeks under a new owner, a young couple eager to restore the shop's nostalgic charm. Holly felt an obligation to check on them. Perhaps she could convince them to leave before the shop's sinister history claimed new victims. When she entered the store, it looked brighter and more cheerful than before. Fresh coats of paint covered the walls, and sunlight poured through the cleaned windows. But beneath the facade, Holly felt the familiar oppressive weight of the shop's dark presence. The new owners, a bubbly woman named Claire and her reserved husband Matthew, greeted her warmly. Claire said, her excitement infectious. "Are you looking for anything special? Actually, I wanted to ask about the shop's history. This place has." Claire waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, we've heard the stories, but honestly, we think they're just old wives' tales. Besides..." Holly glanced at the shelves, her stomach twisting. Among the refurbished toys were familiar faces, the porcelain doll, the tin soldiers, even some marionettes she swore had been destroyed. "They're not just stories," she said. "You need to be careful with these toys." Matthew frowned. "We appreciate your concern, Miss Arnold," Holly said. "Miss Arnold," Matthew continued, "we've heard enough ghost stories to last a lifetime, but we're not going anywhere if anything strange happens." Holly opened her mouth to protest, but a sudden crash from the back room cut her off. "Huh?" Claire asked, her smile faltering. "The return of the toys." Matthew hurried to investigate, but Holly instinctively followed, her heart pounding. The back room was dimly lit, its shelves stocked with tools and half-repaired toys. The journal, which Holly had left at the Historical Society, lay on the workbench, open to a familiar page. "Did you bring this here?" she demanded. Matthew shook his head. "No, we found it in the shop when we moved in." Holly didn't have time to answer. The room grew cold, and the shadows deepened unnaturally. Slowly, the toys on the shelves began to stir. "Oh my God," Claire whispered. "This isn't happening," Matthew muttered. The porcelain doll climbed down from a high shelf, its glass eyes fixed on Holly. Its cracked lips moved, whispering words Holly couldn't understand. Around it, the other toys began to move as well, their tiny forms advancing with malicious intent. Claire screamed. But the door slammed shut on its own, trapping them inside. Holly's gamble. Thinking quickly, Holly grabbed the journal and flipped to the ritual's incantation. She shouted the words aloud, but this time they didn't work. Matthew yelled, swatting at a tin soldier that had latched onto his leg. Holly scanned the page again. Beneath the incantation was a note she hadn't noticed before. "The ritual will only hold for one who has claimed responsibility." Her stomach dropped. The toys wouldn't stop because she had disrupted their cycle. Their vengeance had been halted, and now their fury was untethered. "If they want a sacrifice," she said aloud. Claire gasped, clutching her husband. Holly looked at the journal, then at the toys closing in. She didn't have time to explain. Grabbing a nearby lamp, she smashed it on the ground, sending a ring of flame spreading outward. "This will keep them back." "But you have to leave now." "No!" Claire cried, reaching for her. "And I can't." This started with me. Ignoring their protests, Holly shoved them toward the door, which creaked open as if granting permission. The couple hesitated, but finally ran, leaving Holly alone with the swarm of vengeful toys. The final stand. The flames held the toys at bay, but Holly knew it wouldn't last. She clutched the journal, searching for anything to end this. Her eyes landed on a final note scrawled at the bottom of the page: to free the spirits, return them to their maker. A penny whistle. Summoning all her courage, Holly began chanting another incantation from the journal. The room shook, and a deafening roar filled the air as the toys writhed in agony. One by one, they disintegrated into ash, their forms spiraling upward like smoke. Then everything went still. The oppressive energy lifted, and Holly collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The journal lay open beside her, its pages now blank. Epilogue. The next morning, the toy shop stood empty. The new owners had fled, leaving a for sale sign in the window. Holly returned to her cottage, battered but alive. She would never forget the horrors she faced in Pennywhistle's toy shop. But as she stared at the sea from her window, she couldn't shake the feeling that some secrets had yet to be uncovered. Deep in the ruins of the toy shop's back room, a single porcelain doll lay unbroken, its glassy eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had a great day.